Hi, Christian. Will be another 5 minutes.
That's okay. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hello, check. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I just want to check the big five. Christian?
Yeah. Cool. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, evening, everybody, and welcome to, I think, the last session for today in the South Africa Pavilion, and a particularly interesting session, and one that, in fact, the earlier panel we had was around energy security, and the idea came up that the energy of security of the future is actually commodity security. Do you have the commodities available to you to build the grids of the future, the renewable generation opportunities of the future? And so this plays into that broader debate. And so I want to welcome the panel, and I don't know if you want to come straight up to sit at the front. We have Christian Spano online, and Christian is the Director for Innovation at the International Council of Mining and Minerals, henceforth known as the ICMM. I'm not going to repeat that each time. So welcome, Christian. Good to see you. Francois Dao is the Vice President of Middle Eastern Africa for EDF Renewables. Nicolette Davidson is the Vice President for Corporate Communications and Corporate Responsibility at ArcelorMittal. And last but not least is Themba Mkhwanazi, who is the CEO of Global Bulk Commodities at Anglo American. So a really great mix of expertise from supply and demand side. So if I can ask you to maybe take your seats while I give a brief introduction. So as many of you know, the change in commodity demand is something that we have to be very careful about in how the economy transitions. So as each economy in the world transitions to net zero, they are changing their demand for commodities, right? And so we will see an almost absolute drop off in coal and all net zero scenarios, but an increase in demand for many other commodities, including iron and steel, and some of the things that we have to do in these transitions, for example, is build more renewable energies that takes iron, particularly for wind towers, road to rail. We have to move a lot of our road transport to rail. We need to upgrade our export port infrastructure and our regional rail distributions that take steel. And so you'll see this increase in demand. When we talk about storage, you need vanadium. And so the world of mining also has to evolve. And so we have to be able to produce these commodities in responsible ways. And that's really what the panel is about today. And we really have this really excellent group of people who are going to help us elucidate these topics. So I'm going to open with a general question to all the panelists, and we'll start with you, Themba, is just how do you see the change in commodity demand, and particularly which commodities do you think where the future's bright and perhaps where it might be less bright?
Hello. Happiness. Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Our view, Steve, is that, as the need for urbanization globally intensifies. I mean, we heard that, was it last week? We achieved the 8th billion human being that was born. And the projections are that certainly by 2050 to 2060, we will have about 9 to 10 billion people, about 3 billion people from now till 2025 will move into urban areas. So that in itself will necessitate a significant demand for minerals and metals. Similarly, when you look at the intensity from a decarbonization perspective, it's probably 3 times as much, particularly when you consider steel, because that's just the nature. I mean, you know, windmills, PV plants and all of that require more steel, right, than, you know, our current carbonized energy sources, as an example. So when you think about what's the scale of what's required, it's quite significant. I mean, if I think about copper, we're probably looking at 3 times the amount of copper that was mined or available in 2020 will be required in 2050. Similarly, nickel, probably 4 times the amount of nickel. Steel is one that is forgotten, but people need to, you know, come to the fact that steel is the backbone in terms of, you know, infrastructure, which is obviously key to human development and the development of economies. So that will probably double as well in terms of demand. Also, you know, when we think about coal, we must also not forget that coal will continue to play a significant role even in the transition. So for example, you know, if I would say thermal coal as an example, you know, the world's energy requirement will probably still need 30% of coal. So 30% of the energy requirement will still be coal-based for decades to come. And that's because the transition is a multi-decade transition. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So that's what I would probably say, and probably pause there on the demand.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to bring in Christian, hopefully, because I mustn't forget you sitting there online and not in the room with us. Christian, your thoughts on this kind of overall framing and how commodity demand might be shifting in the future?
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to repeat what Themba has said, which is basically the crux of it. I just want to say, I mean, if you think about this opportunity in terms of growth of demand and what that means for countries, host countries, it might be a once in a 50-year opportunity. If we go in the future by 2040 and we look at an operation, it will look very different. It would have renewable electricity close to it. It will have climate-based solutions close to it, either you know, agricultural climate-based or forestry climate-based. It will have battery management facilities. It would have, I mean, it would have a number of things that today don't exist. And it's just this growth, I mean, in terms of copper, steel, nickel. I mean, if you think where these operations are, this is really a fantastic opportunity for the host countries to diversify into industries that today don't exist or don't have the scale. And another thing that I want to say is in terms of the scale of this demand and where the commodity demand is going, it's fascinating to see also that we're building stocks of these precious metals today. All that copper, all that nickel, all that aluminum and steel is going into products like electric vehicles, batteries, wind farms, and solar. We really have to be careful in designing all of that for easy recovery and efficient recovery. Otherwise, in 20, 30 years' time, we will have a problem where we will have a massive amount of stock of material that we would like to recover, and it could become very, very hard to recover. That's another lens that we can see in terms of shifting the commodity demand, but also on the volumes and where they are going and what do we want to do with them.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. And I mean, just want to point out to the audience that not by design at all, but we have supply, processing, demand, and the overseeing of the ICMM, which, you know, we didn't do on purpose. Nicola, maybe you can reflect particularly ArcelorMittal on steel and how you see demand patterns change.
Yeah, sure. So ArcelorMittal is indeed a steel company. We operate in many regions of the world, including South Africa. Themba talked about the ubiquity of steel as a material. Just to put some numbers on that, in 2021, there was approximately 1.9 billion tons of steel produced globally. We do expect that to grow, not quite to double on a global basis, but to reach 2.6 billion tons by 2050. So obviously for the world to reach net zero by 2050, steel obviously has to decarbonize. You were talking about this, the different ways, the different products which are going to become valuable in the supply chain. So there's fundamentally two different ways to make steel today. One is when you use iron ore in the blast furnace with coke to take out the oxygen and create hot metal. The other is essentially the scrap-based route to steel making, which is called secondary steel making. So you can use the scrap in a electric arc furnace with electricity, potentially renewable electricity, to create steel as well. That does have a much lower carbon footprint, but there are limitations, obviously, in terms of the amount of scrap that we have in the world. So as we progress closer to the end of the century, more and more steel will be made using the scrap route, but it's absolutely vital in the medium term that we can decarbonize primary steel making. So how do you do that? Ultimately, there are two technology routes. One is using green hydrogen in the with direct reduced iron and electric arc furnace. And that's something we're very much looking at in South Africa. And the other is carbon capture, utilization and storage, which we're also looking at in South Africa as well. So both of those two technology routes we're looking at in South Africa. Obviously, we're going to require huge amounts of renewable electricity and green hydrogen to do that. And I think that's one of the biggest differences for steel making. So we will use much less coal and coke. We will still need the iron ore, but we're going to need lots of green hydrogen and therefore renewables to do the job that coal is doing at the moment, to break down the oxygen out of the iron ore to create the steel.
Yeah, which is a great segue to you, Francois, from the EDF side. How do you see that renewable energy demand playing out? And there seems to be like a bit of a positive cycle there. You need more renewable energy for the hydrogen to make the green steel to build the renewable energy and vice versa. Your thoughts?
First, allow me 30 seconds to EDF. We are
Please.
French utilities. Two figures, our total net installed capacity is 130 plus gigawatt around the world, mainly in Europe. And another figure which is quite interesting, which show who we are, is that 91% of the electricity we supplied in 2021 was zero carbon electricity. Of course, from nuclear, from hydro, from solar, and from wind. This is our DNA, low carbon electricity. Now, let me give you the answer with a concrete project, tangible sign. This is a joint venture we started early this year with Anglo American, where we together, two different worlds, we are electrons, they are mining, where we believe strongly that we need to help each other, support each other to achieve net zero by 2030, few months delay, with all Anglo-American mines in South Africa and nearby. This is a major target. This will not happen like that. We have 100 plus people in South Africa for last almost 10 years now, where they are running around the country, fantastic country, to find land, prepare everything, study, wind, environmental, and that's how we could propose these production facilities outside the mine, but as well as within the land of the mines, to supply green electricity to the mining activities and to reach net zero very soon. So this is definitely something that we are very proud, both of us, to achieve, and we'll be much prouder soon, I will hope within less than 2 years, to have the first green kilowatt hour feeding the first mine over there. You are right to talk about demand. Yes, everywhere we see, and we, for last week now here, we talk a lot about renewables. They need to grow, we need to accelerate the deployment. Of course, we need steel a lot. Thank you very much for helping us. And there's an issue between what we need and what is available and what will be available. So that's where innovation is. And that's where we are all a lot of engineers in our company. We love engineering, and this is how we work. Actually, this morning, we just signed a framework agreement with the Egyptian authorities to go for a large green hydrogen project for producing in Egypt and exporting, hopefully to Europe or to Japan. This is far away from our business of renewables, but yes, we need to change. We need to innovate in order to meet only one thing: to decarbonize all activities as much industries as we could.
So I mean, maybe staying with you for a second, are you concerned about the supply of steel and other raw materials for these renewable energy systems?
We did suffer, as you know, from the supply chain crisis a year ago. Prices went, it's now going down, but all the prices are crazy. Energy price in Europe are absolutely out of any mind now. Yes, we do suffer, but it gives us, it gives us a hint of what's happening if we don't make it happen. If we don't really, all of us, do everything of we are doing by reducing our carbon footprint. So of course, it's translated into prices first, and we do suffer in our business. Nothing new about it. Yes, we need to be more efficient. I don't think that we will be able to produce more and more all the time. So we will have to consume less. We will need to have to save, yes, differently. I don't have the answer. Trying to do everything every day, hopefully to leave some solution to the future generation.
Okay. I mean, Themba, I guess the underlying question here is there enough of the stuff in the ground? Like, what do you think about the sort of supply side of these minerals?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is stuff in the ground. The challenge, though, is that I think the world needs to get its mind around how are we actually going to get the stuff out of the ground? Because when you think about it, what you're finding is that there is an element of resource depletion. The grades are getting poorer. I mean, there was a time where, if you mine copper, you would mine at grades around the 0.4% of copper. Today, if you find something which is like 0.05 or 0.1%, you are happy, right? So there's an element of that. There's also an element, though, of getting projects to market, given the various approval processes that you have to go through, the licensing that you have to go through. And what you are tending to find as well is that some of the resources that obviously are critical tend to be in locations which are very remote with very little or no infrastructure. And I'm not sure people are quite appreciative of the fact that from concept to actually getting stuff coming out of a mine, as an example, or a processing plant, it can take you the best part of 15 to 20 years. So it's a challenge. And clearly it makes us think differently about how to overcome this challenge. One element of this, obviously, is the reliance on primary metal in terms of mining, but also we got to start to think about recycling as well, which was also mentioned, to compensate where we are with regards to primary, even though given the demand, recycling is not going to be enough. What it also lends itself to is us thinking differently about how we actually mine, how we are a lot more efficient in terms of using technology, how we think about not moving the volumes or disturbing the amounts of land that we would conventionally disturb. Because it's very much about how do we make it easier, but have less of an impact in terms of our environment, in terms of land, in terms of water. But yeah, it's a big challenge, and it's going to become even bigger as well, because when you also think about the skill space that you actually need to complement you in order to run these mines, run these processing plants. And when institutions of education are not producing these skills fast enough, or the youngsters are not actually going into that field of study, that in itself adds to the challenge.
You know, these conversations are kind of terrifying every time we have them. You know, the level of demand on the use side necessitates a huge amount of innovation to do the same kind of power generation, but with less resource. But even then, the resource demand is going to be huge, and we're trying to mine land that's increasingly less productive, which maybe means a bigger surface area. So we have to be much more innovative, much more enterprising in how we extract these ores. I mean, these are big tasks, right? Like we're you know, the same kind of fundamental transitions we're forced to think about in the climate change space around agriculture and energy generation. Those same things are playing out in these kind of mining and bulk commodity value chains, and that's kind of fascinating. Christian, I saw you nodding quite vigorously to some of the things that Themba was saying, and wondered if you want to come in on some of those comments, but maybe also just talk more about the sort of circular economy components and the waste components that play a role in this demand management.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I am fascinating to be alive in this time. Not only we need to do what you have just said, which is many times reimagine a lot of the processes and the activities that we have been doing for a long time, but we need to reimagine them in a period of time that is incredibly small for what it's stake. I usually think about the transition as a child. So if the transition child will be born today, it will be 28 years old by 2050, so pretty young. We don't have a lot of time, right, to drive these transformations. I think the circular economy is a fantastic lens. And if we think about the circular economy as two things, there is a natural stock on the ground that we're trying to extract, and that stock is becoming increasingly more difficult to mine. And the ask is that we focus, we recognize that land needs to become a renewable resource, a resource that we can mine, but we need to live it even better, no? Going to the concept of nature positive. So if we are to do that, then we're having a circular model of mining, and that is happening already. If you look at the definitions of future smart mining or the innovation in tailings and all of that, conceptually, the mining industry is becoming circular in many ways. So that's the route of travel, and for all the reasons that Themba has shared with us. I mean, it's imperative that we use less resources, we disrupt the area of land that we do less, and so on. Now, and we can call that process circularity. Now, all that material that we recover from that natural stock is going to markets. So the products are going to markets. And here is where is the interesting aspect. We are taking the natural stock into an urban stock in many forms, in the cars, in the buildings, in the bridges. But that material that we mine, it's going to an urban stock that is highly concentrated. We know where it is, And if we are, if we're clever enough, we're going to ask the producers of those wind farms and those electric vehicles to design for early recovery. So that stock will grow over time. Will grow over time. We will know where it is. And if it's designed for recovery, it can actually play a substantial role. Now, if we think about the capabilities of a mining company, a global mining company like Anglo American, where the capabilities are of immense engineering capacity, great capacity to raise capital at extraordinary cost, fantastic ability to manage very large portfolio of complex projects, that all those skills are going to be needed to recover the stock of materials in, that are urban, that are in markets. So there is a fantastic opportunity to really drive an agenda that allows us to track and really allow all the material that we're mining increasingly more difficult into the stocks that we can recover, not by recycling, not by turning them into waste and then trying to recover them inefficiently through recycling, but actually to design for very efficient recovery at any point in time. And that is the bit of innovation that is missing. We are equating the circular economy as recycling, and that only takes us to 2040, 2050 in a very small scale. But if we really push a new business model, a new operating model that allows us to have early access to all those growing stocks of material, this could be a game changer. And mining companies have the right skills to play a crucial role in that game.
Oh, interesting. I mean, Nicola, I would be interested in your thoughts on this kind of, you mentioned it briefly, but this like circular economy, steel recovery. We mentioned vehicles, the need to move away from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle at a rate faster than you would probably keep these internal combustion engines in the market. I mean, is that a real stock of steel? If we're talking about, I mean, we don't really recycle buildings. So is there, I mean, how seriously do you take this circular economy idea?
Yeah, no, I mean, within the steel industry, we've always embraced the concept of the circular economy. I mean, as I mentioned, steel is an incredibly recyclable material already. So we start from a real position of strength. And the recycling rates of steel are already extremely high. Just to give you a sort of percentage split. So I talked about how there's two ways to make steel. The primary way, which uses the virgin iron ore, or the secondary way, which uses scrap. It's about a 70-30 split today. So 70% in favor of the primary iron ore, 30% in favor of scrap. There certainly is the opportunity to increase scrap. So if you look at our climate action report, you do see increased scrap use as a lever for our decarbonization targets. But the opportunities at this point are relatively limited. And that's why we say it's so important as well to find ways to decarbonize primary steel making too, which we believe we can do, which is good. But just on your point about, is it possible to recycle buildings? It actually is. So this is something we've been thinking about for some time. And we launched, I think 3-4 years ago now, what we call our Stelligence brand. And that's intelligent construction solutions. So it's really looking at how to reduce the carbon footprint of a building, embracing circular economy ways of thinking. And actually we are making beams which can be recycled and reused at a later point in time if and when that building is taken down. So yes, I think absolutely all of these concepts are now coming into the way we think about our steel products, particularly sort of big, heavy steel beams and structures. The other point I was just going to make in terms of the material efficiency is, I mentioned before that we expect steel demand to grow to 2.6 billion tons by 2050. That is factoring in some material efficiency as well. There are more other aggressive demands out there in the market, which see maybe steel demand remaining sort of around where it is today. And that's taking into account the growth that's going to come from the ongoing industrialization of the developing economies. And also, as Themba talked about, all of the steel that's required for the net zero economy, because you will find steel in electric vehicles, in low carbon buildings, in renewable energy infrastructure. So The reality is we don't know. I mean, we don't really know yet how much material demand is going to be used in 2050, but we do believe that it will continue to grow, and that's already factoring in material efficiency. But yes, circular economy, a principle that absolutely we embrace in the steel industry.
Two quick follow-ons. This ratio of 70-30, how do you see that changing over time? Is it going to stay relatively constant, or do you see a shift?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, different people have different views on this.
Sure.
But essentially, I think by 2050, it will probably be closer to 50-50.
Okay.
And then maybe by the end of the century, theoretically, you could start to get to a place where actually 100% of steel is made through scrap. There are quality issues. So at the moment, you do tend to get a higher quality steel made through the primary steel making route. But we have how many years? 78 years to fix that. So,
and then at this point, that Christian made about design, is there, and I think I picked up from what you were saying, you're already kind of thinking about that, even at this kind of quite industrial manufacturing base, thinking about how you design beams and so on. Maybe say a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have within our research and development division, in fact, our head of our Stelligence unit came out of our research and development division. So he had been working really hard on sort of thinking through the circular economy concept for construction, launched Stelligence, and then that's been spun out into an individual business unit. So certainly that is something that we think about a lot across different product categories.
Very interesting. Thank you. Francois, maybe a bit sort of getting to, I mean, this conversation is a little bit global, given these are global commodities. I mean, the steel price is fixed globally. It's not, doesn't happen at a country level, but maybe just because we're in the South Africa Pavilion, maybe talk a little bit about renewable energy in South Africa and the economic opportunity that kind of brings.
First, so South Africa, as you know, is still very much short of electricity. We do suffer cut, blackout over there. So yes, renewables is the fastest, easiest solution to provide electricity. So this is what we are doing. There are bid tenders every year now. And then there's an auction system. So we bid for this and then we win projects. Unfortunately, the recent crisis, supply chain has increased prices, so projects are not starting as early as we wish. But okay, we have just closed 2 projects. Yes, we are back on the right track. Of course, electricity needs the network to be transported from the point of production to the end users, homes and so on. Is where the second thing that South Africa needs to invest, unfortunately, heavily in order to have the grid much more expanded and much more closer to, in larger volume to end users. Of course, and that thankfully, our sector brings jobs. This is very much needed in South Africa also. We are talking about here 1,000 megawatt to be we are starting construction these days or these months. That means that 2,000 jobs will be created throughout the construction of 2-3 years. And I'm sure that there will be other projects. So that means that this is part of the wealth creation that we can do. And lastly is the communities. We do payroll. We have reserve equity for the communities, and we have also an allocation as board director along with some of the team. We will decide how much, but a portion of our revenue will be donated to trust funds in order to help these communities much better than, well, they know what to do. We have the chance to have revenues, and this is how we share sort of revenues wealth along with the communities where we're using their land for our production.
I mean, so you mentioned that there needs to be investment in actual generation capacity as well as the grid infrastructure. What about the sort of rail and port infrastructure? Like presumably you're importing blades and things like that. How do you find that experience around the world, but also in South Africa?
We don't use, well, of course, most of the items are now imported a lot from China, as you can imagine. Yes, we use port. South Africa with Egypt as well as with Morocco are definitely, well, are one of the most developed countries in terms of port facilities. So we have no big issue there. Roads are well, so we can transport large wind blades along the road. It's not, transportation is not really an issue for us. For us, it's really the land, because we need a lot of land for solar panels, as you can imagine. Wind farm do take, we take some place. People may not be happy. Yes, we know this, and that's why we are spending years to study all this, to deploy and to accelerate the deployment. Now, as I said, we need to innovate. And you are right, 30% from scrap. It needs green energy, need green hydrogen. This is where we, as we have gained some experience with Anglo American, of course, we need to work with other industries, people that we are not meeting naturally every day. Yes, we need to build this in order to help each other. Yeah, to do much more than what we are doing or what this renewable industry is doing. We all need to do much more.
Okay. I'm going to come to the audience soon, so I want to give you some warnings so you can start thinking of some questions. But maybe just reversing the flow a little bit. I mean, Nicola, do you notice a regional kind of focus for where these steel plants might be located and a regional supply? How do you see that kind of demand side pattern playing out?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, ArcelorMittal has a network of steel plants around the world, obviously, already. So for us, I mean, it's not that we're looking at our steel plants thinking they need to move. It's more about the change in the supply chain. But it's interesting because you are beginning to see some new entrants into the steel industry. They're obviously seeing the opportunity for low carbon steel. And so it's interesting to see the thought process they go through in terms of thinking, where shall I make that investment? What country shall I make that investment in? And we've seen one, so there's a new company coming up, and they're building a steel mill in Sweden from scratch, because there's obviously lots of renewables there. For ArcelorMittal, obviously, it's about where the demand is for the end product. But then the question is really looking at the supply chain in terms of, okay, well, where are the raw materials coming from? Where's the clean energy coming from, etc. So in South Africa coming to us, so we have quite a major manufacturing presence in South Africa. And we recently announced a partnership with Sasol to look at the production of green hydrogen, because obviously that's one thing that we will need. Actually, we have a DRI plant in South Africa, and actually that hasn't been operating for some years because of the price of natural gas. It became uncompetitive. But as I mentioned, that's one of the technologies that really has the potential to take the steel industry to near zero. So we're now working with Sasol to look at how to build the green hydrogen capability for green hydrogen steel production at that plant, which is down near Cape Town, as well as having the capacity for South Africa to export green hydrogen as well.
Yeah, I'm fascinated between this relationship between commodity security and energy security and vice versa. And so a country can be competitive for attracting investment in industry with a decent energy system, right? So that's interesting. So I guess before I turn to the audience, one sort of last bit of focus on the environment and social components of this industry, right? And so we're talking about this massively increased supply, and we need to be able to supply that in a way that's socially and environmentally responsible. So Christian, I'm to keep this reverse flow going, I'm going to ask you to come in and just talk a little bit about your thoughts on that. Where are the key things the sector needs to focus on?
Yeah, thank you. I think, again, going back to the opportunity, I think this is a really big opportunity. I mean, if we go to 2040 and we're looking at a mine, that mine has a number of elements that have increased the investment and the job creation potential in areas that wouldn't exist without this agenda in mining, of zero carbon mining. You will get all these investments in renewable electricity. that would have been accelerated and would have reached a scale that wouldn't have happened without mining. So just to give you an example, if all the mining companies that are part of ICMM deliver to their commitments on renewable energy uptake, we will get by 2030 to 18 gigawatts of renewable electricity. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's bigger than the capacity that is built today in Colombia, all the capacity in Colombia. That would be, so it's a phenomenal amount of investment in technologies and in industries that, if they exist, are very small in these countries. Another area that is very interesting to see is climate-based solutions. So if we think about climate-based solutions, this is regenerative agriculture at scale. This is reforestation at scale, usually in areas that are close or in the area that is owned by the mine, either close to the mine or in the area that is owned by the mine. The kind of jobs that you can create in regenerative agriculture and forestry are the ones much closer to those needed by communities. Now, the beauty of this is that because these projects are designed to capture carbon, once you have the plantations, you can actually start developing a carbon economy in terms of, managing the accountancy, managing the drones that are used to reforestation, managing the trading of the carbon, managing the financing. I mean, there is a new economy that is coming on top of the basic jobs that you can match in there. And if the mines continue their process of becoming more circular with aspects of smart mining, you will have a number of new industries that are using the waste flows of today. You're going to have industries that have to do with recycling of water, recycling of batteries, a number of elements that don't exist today. So from a social and environmental point of view, the model that we are heading towards can really generate a much brighter future than the one that we have today. There is a win-win situation. And just to finalize this point, we tend to think on opportunities like green hydrogen. And sometimes I feel that we're trying to do the most difficult bit, which is producing the green hydrogens in places like South Africa that have a great potential, and then export it to places where we have steel today, like in China, Korea, or Japan. There is a fantastic opportunity to bring at least iron making to the countries that have access to vast amounts of green hydrogen. And so instead of exporting the green hydrogen that is going to be tough in the next 10 years or 20 years, because it needs to really get to a competitive level, and it's not on the production side, it's in the export side, you can bring the iron making, and that will increase the value chain downstream that is now in Japan and in Korea. You can put it in places like South Africa. That would generate a vast growth in green hydrogen, but also in another part of the value chain, and will shift the game. So I think this, if we are sitting in 2040, there is a very good model to implement that will create jobs at different levels and will lead us to nature positive and net zero.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate this opportunity idea, and particularly when we think about South Africa and South Africa's transitions, we're very conscious of this. Given our starting point, South Africa has amongst the highest unemployment, inequality, and poverty in the world, and so there's this kind of parallel challenge we have of growing the economy and diversifying the economy. And maybe Themba, you'd be best placed to reflect on this a little bit. What is Anglo doing to both ensure environmental and sustainable outputs, but also build trust? How do we know that you're actually doing that?
Yeah, so before I respond to that specific question, I'd also like to touch on how we see the social aspects as Anglo-American, because we really believe that, we are at a seminal point as a sector, given obviously the demand for our metals and minerals, but at the same time, though, the need for us to ensure that we meet the needs, not just the societal needs, but the needs of the environment. And we believe that we can actually achieve that in harmony, where you meet the needs of society, you meet the needs of the environment, and you do it in such a way that you create enduring value for all stakeholders. And it's got to be inclusive. So when we think about just transition, that's how we think about just transition. And we also believe as well that it's got to be just because it's recognized as just by our stakeholders and not just by what we say. And there's probably 3 elements that define what a just transition is. The first and foremost is the right to a quality life for all, right? And in particularly when you think about the need to build climate change resilience, you know, some of our stakeholders in the various parts of the world are experiencing floods, cyclones, they're experiencing conditions, drought, and everything like that. So we are effectively saying the just transition must recognize that whatever we do, it addresses those elements. The second aspect is the right for fair, decent work. And again, this is really thinking about being inclusive about what we do in terms of how we mine, but at the same time, ensuring that we create inclusive economies. And then the third and the last one really talks to, you know, what Francois used as an example of, where we see that there has to be access to affordable energy, which is obviously renewable. There has to be access to clean water, and there also has to be access to productive land. So when you put all of that together, that's really what just transition means for us as Anglo-American. And hence, that's why we've partnered with EDF with the renewable energy project that we talked about. How do we ensure that we are honest about this? I think we think about the importance of independent verification, because we are of the view that it's going to become even more important for consumers to want to know where were the minerals that are in this product, where were they mined, and how were they mined, and how did they impact, right? So that independent verification is going to be important, because coupled with that is this concept of provenance, where people actually know where it's coming from. Now, there are bodies out there, like, for example, IRMA, and we at Anglo-American are signatories to IRMA, and we've had some of our facilities, of the 36 facilities that we have, some of them are actually registered by IRMA. So IRMA has standards to say, if you are following sustainability, these are the elements of what you need to have in place, and we are going to independently verify you. And in fact, we are targeting that by 2025, most, if not all, of our 36 mining/processing facilities need to have had some level of independent verification, because that's important. And of course, that also keeps us honest as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, please add. Yeah.
Maybe just picking up on the point Themba was making on IRMA. There's similar standards being developed for the steel industry over the last probably 6-7 years, called Responsible Steel, which you may have heard of, and that goes back down into the raw materials as well, and plugging in with either, well, both IRMA and TSM as well. So like Anglo-American, we've started to have our sites certified against responsible steel. And that's something that we see more and more customers asking for, rightly so, just for that satisfaction that the ESG issues are really being properly thought through.
Yeah, thank you. And all of renewable energy is responsible, so that's okay. Any questions you want to comment?
Sorry, all renewables, and sorry, I forgot to mention this. When we say renewables, as you know, it's variable, intermittent energy. We have this problem. We need train to start on time, so that means that we need storage. And this is something that we are working with Anglo-American again to add a large capacity of hydro storage. It's again, South Africa has a lot of things, and it has also a couple of spots which would allow us to store water, to pump it, to store water, and therefore to use it at the right time where we have excess energy and so on. This is another thing which add, by the way, more energy with less steel.
More energy.
Less steel, but more energy. Okay. So again, it's something we need to develop.
Yeah, this is the storage conversation is important, especially because when we get back to commodities, there's a whole new set of commodities, not necessarily for hydro, but for battery level storage that also create global demand. I want to see if there are any questions in the room. We've got one question at the back there.
Hi, can you hear me? Great. First, thanks very much for this. This was it's really great to get under the surface of what we mean when we're talking about clean and green growth, which is this stuff. So
Sorry, could I ask you to introduce yourself as well?
sorry, yeah, Mark Anderson from UK Export Finance. There was mention in the just transition and the need for access to water being part of that. I was listening to a panel last week where it was mentioned that I think in Chile, 75% of Chile's fresh water goes towards the mining of lithium. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on the inherent trade-offs in what we're talking about here.
Great, thanks.
Basically, you know, to what extent is this given what you've said about the difficulties in mining lots of these products? To what extent are we talking about something that's truly sustainable?
Great. Timber, I'm going to ask you to respond, and then Christian will come to you.
Sure. Okay, I'm back on. It's a very good question, and one that is obviously pertinent, and more so in South and Central America. So a couple of perspectives, right? For us, certainly, you know, the abstraction of fresh water is top of mind, and in particularly in relation to aquifers. So we, for example, we want to halve that by 50% by 2030, and it's a stated ambition and a stated goal, right? And probably doing more recycle is an important element. I do think, though, that we all have a role to play, because whilst mining might be using water, in comparison, agriculture is probably 10 times more the volumes. Now, that's not an excuse for the miners not to do anything, but it just goes to say that in tandem with what we are doing, we should also be doing the same thing in the agricultural space as well, because the numbers from a magnitude and scale are quite even more severe. We're doing a lot as well around reverse osmosis, because clearly that's important. But like all these things, you know, as you quite rightly say, there has to be a trade-off, because even with reverse osmosis, it's quite energy intensive, okay? And of course, if it's based on fossil fuels, then in a way, while it might, you know, solve for one, it actually creates a problem for the other. So you are continually having to make these trade-offs, but the way we think about it is to basically say, we know what the North Star looks like that we are wanting to follow. And as we make these trade-offs, we would like to think that we are reducing our impact on the environment.
Thanks. Christian, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a very good question that is focused on a very particular commodity. I mean, lithium, when you think about saline extraction of the lithium in places like the triangle of lithium in South America, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, by design, it has an extremely intensive process of use of water. And there is a reason why Australia it's now the largest exporter of lithium, because they have the other sort of the other type of lithium extraction, which is hard rock, which uses much less water. And this is just to reflect on the fact that you were asking whether there is a truly sustainable way of doing this. I think the constraints are showing that if you're not sustainable, you're not going to win in this game. It's as easy as that. And there is a fact in lithium specifically that today in Australia, you know, even if it is more expensive and in many ways the process might be even technologically harder, it is the largest exporter of lithium. It is a massive challenge. and it's a massive challenge across the board, as Themba was reflecting with us just now. The technologies that are being applied today, like reverse osmosis or recycling of water, we can even take it further, no? And there are technologies that are really thinking about the waterless mine, it is a focus for the mining industry, not only within the sustainability agenda, but because mining is going to places where access to these inputs are going to be increasingly more difficult. And so developing these technologies that significantly reduce the input of water, energy, any input, and also the disturbance of land become critical from a purely productivity point of view, from a purely competitiveness point of view. And so these things have at least two very strong levers pulling the industry into the right direction. One is sustainability, and the other one is competitiveness. And so we can truly believe that the industry has enough incentives to become at some point much better at recycling water to the kind of levels that Themba was sharing with us, 50% less by 2030. But also at some point, it will become waterless, depending on the technology. But today it's a big challenge. The design of mining today is water incentive. I want to finish just with the other flip of the coin. If you look at Chile, and you think about what has happened with the need of water in very desertic areas in the northern part of Chile, where most of the mining happens, there is a lot of innovation and development of desalinization of water from the sea. And that not only has brought water that is consumable for the mine, but also water that can be shared with communities across the whole pipeline. And so this is also something that we need to think about. What happens when a mine exists that wouldn't exist if the mine wasn't there? Like access to electricity, like access to clean water, like access to jobs. So we always need to keep that balance, I think, to really look at the challenge and the opportunity at the same time.
Thanks, Christian. We've got time for one more question. There's a question online from Tsidiso Mokhatla. And just to acknowledge, there are about 50 people online as well. So this is being followed quite intently. He basically asking, what about the regulatory framework? Is it moving at the same pace as the technological advancements? I mean, is there a regulatory barrier to some of these transitions? And we're running out of time, so very quick answers. Anybody want to kind of field that one?
It's absolutely part of the solution for sure. So we need policy, we need regulation on multiple fronts. So, I mean, I've been participating in quite a few discussions today about the definition of low carbon steel. What is the definition of low carbon steel? How do you introduce that into regulation in order to stimulate the demand pool, which is of course vital. On the other side, of course, I mean, there's how do you help make these renewable energies competitive in the short term? So what policy and regulation is required there? So absolutely, it's an important piece. But I think all of these pieces come together and work together, because if you wait for one thing to happen, then you end up in a kind of, well, I'm sitting on this step waiting for the trigger to come that will take me to the next step. So I think and we see it here. We have Themba, who makes the iron ore that hopefully we'll put in our DRI using the EDF green hydrogen. So there's much more collaboration now across the value chain, and also with finance and with policy, in terms of really taking the time to understand how you unlock progress and how you accelerate progress. But for sure, regulation is absolutely part of the jigsaw puzzle.
Just 30 seconds. I think it's important because we hear a lot of CO2 offset, 1 million ton, 1,000. It's not very clear either way how we count it. Each of us or each company count it. So in order to avoid this or can delete this misunderstanding or greenwashing, let's say it, okay? So we need to have clear rule, and this is what COP also is used for, is to agree on the way to measure it precisely, honestly, so that population, large community, people like who are not industries, who are not space experts, can rely on what each of us is announcing in terms of offsetting CO2. Very simple thing, but we need to do it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I mean, so we're largely out of time, and I want to thank the panelists. I mean, I'm struck by a sector that is expanding to meet demands of critical minerals and other resources that we need to enable the transition, but left with quite a big challenge, quite a lot of innovation that we talked about that's still needed, but built on quite a strong base of historical innovation. So I am encouraged, and I'm really grateful for your contributions, and good luck with what is quite a complex process that requires both innovation and, as you pointed out, partnerships up and down the value chain with regulators, with communities. So yeah, looking forward to how things develop, and thanks again, and thank you to the audience, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to South Africa Pavilion. Very nice.